Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mindset Forge, a podcast where we discuss the best ideas of humanity, the most useful practices, and the most skillful means for developing a more well-adjusted and adaptive mindset. To do this, I will be discussing latest science, ancient philosophy that has stood the test of time, as well as the thoughts and actions of important historical paragons. The goal is to give you tools and practices and ideas for your self-improvement, with the goal of moving ahead the entire humanity. Our discussion will focus on the ideas and practices with the most cash value, so practices that are easy to take up but hold enormous potential. And since most of these practices have to do with changing your thinking and attitudes, they are completely free. Call me Laurent Lohel, I will be your host, and welcome aboard. Also, make sure to like Mindset Forge on Spotify and YouTube, as well as check out our Discord server, where you can find links to my book, which you can buy on Amazon to support my another side enterprise of being a fiction author. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. Mindset Forge, episode 16. Neuroscience of Nirvana. Enlightenment for a wave in the ocean is the moment the wave realizes it is water. Thich Nhat Hanh. Hello and welcome back to Mindset Forge. Today I thought I would challenge myself by choosing a more demanding and difficult, obscure subject for the episode, but a topic which has been on the back of my mind for a while now. The topic today is the state known as Nirvana, and if we can better understand it with modern scientific findings. The reason this can be considered difficult is because, as we will learn, it is the ultimate goal of spiritual practice, something just a few people manage to accomplish. Furthermore, due to its rarity and its nature that appears completely different from normal experience, it is highly difficult to study, as study subjects are hard to come by, and even if one can be found, how do you measure something that is described as beyond words and concepts? I will discuss some of the theories I have come up with during my research, as well as the research done by real scientists and researchers. In this episode, we are embarking on a fascinating journey that intertwines the profound insights of Buddhist philosophy with the cutting-edge discoveries of neuroscience. This way, I hope to further our understanding of the state of nirvana, ultimate peace and liberation, and how it might be understood through the lens of our brain's chemistry and circuitry. Why should you keep listening to a topic as obscure as this one? As you may be aware, nirvana is seen as the ultimate state filled with bliss but also perfect perception. And who wouldn't want to be happy, free and clear-sighted? Perhaps by looking at the subject from the perspective of Western science, the concept of nirvana becomes more familiar and something that can be taken seriously as something one can and should accomplish. This podcast deals with self-improvement, and as the ultimate state, nirvana is the very apex of that process. Most people live seeking happiness, but as nirvana is the ultimate happiness, all the happiness one finds is a pale shadow compared to the ultimate state, and often people only find more misery as they are ignorant of what really brings happiness and grasp for the things that don't benefit them in the long run. Let's begin with the definition of terms, namely nirvana, as it can mean many things and many people have an incorrect understanding of the subject. Nirvana, as it is called in the language of Sanskrit, or Nibbana, which is the same thing in the language of Pali, means extinguishing, as in fire going out. At first glance, this sounds quite bad. Why would we want to go out, so to speak? The possible confusion here is caused by cultural differences. In ancient India and the region, a burning fire was considered as a symbol of craving. A fire is agitated and utterly dependent on its fuel. It blazes and cannot stop, craving ever more fuel. Ancient Indians did not consider a burned out fire as dead. Instead, they considered it free and at rest. It was even thought to get diffused across cosmos. So, in the view of ancient Indians, burning fire is a suffering prisoner of addiction, while a burned out fire is free and limitless. And this is why the Buddha used this example to explain his concepts. These days, when we see things as exactly in an opposite way, seeing burned out fire as dead, his meaning is lost in translation. In Buddhism and other relativistic philosophies, and the world in general, anything can be interpreted as anything. Fittingly, Nirvana too means different things to different people. Some of these meanings speak more to me than the others, but I will detail most common meanings just to be thorough. For a person who believes in reincarnation, Nirvana would mean being freed from the eternal cycle of birth, life and death. We won't be looking too deeply in this view, at least in its literal sense, as to my knowledge we don't have enough compelling evidence about reincarnation being real. Of course, some people are thought to be reincarnations of past dead people, a notable example being Dalai Lama, who supposedly reincarnates every time he dies. So all the 14 Dalai Lamas have been the same person since the 1400s. But if this had been conclusively proven, I'm sure I would have heard of it, along with everyone else. Another meaning for Nirvana, one that even a modern Western person can better work with, is being liberated from all suffering, which usually takes place by extinguishing all craving. When one ceases to crave things, which in this context means that they no longer wish for things to be different than they are freed from suffering. Such a person has reached happiness, as they are content just as things are. This also extinguishes fear, jealousy and so on. This is easy enough to understand, and one can easily imagine the benefits of this state. However, as we will discuss, Nirvana has more meanings, many of which are harder to grasp. Many of these understandings belong to higher steps of Buddhism and similar contemplative traditions, and they would likely consider this understanding of Nirvana to be faulty. Why is that? Because we didn't include experiential understanding of emptiness in the description. Emptiness, meaning that nothing has inherent nature, is a key Buddhist concept, one which we have discussed before. One meaning given for Nirvana is that one understands this concept so thoroughly they constantly see everything as empty and truly feel it. This way they are freed from clinging. Just like in the previous point, understanding emptiness, according to this view, is understanding reality, having the right view on things, and there can't be Nirvana if one remains ignorant to reality. Nirvana has also been called the unconditioned state, another mouthful that doesn't really say much to the uninitiated. However, this is another meaning that is useful even for the novice. Simply put, in this context, conditioned can be thought akin to psychological or behavioral conditioning. Classic Pavlovian example: if you ring a bell before giving food to a dog, eventually it will begin to salivate at the sound of the bell without any food present. Similarly, much of our behavior is conditioned. We receive a signal and react in some way. in the worst case, completely mindlessly. The person who has attained nirvana can be thought of as having surpassed their conditioning. They are free to act on their own, their words and deeds arising from somewhere else than the prior programming. Nirvana can also mean seeing or understanding reality as it is, with the stress on seeing, as that is experiential, while understanding is related to thoughts which are seen as inferior to direct perception. This may sound weird, as Western thinking so prioritizes thinking and intelligence, but answer me this: which is better, eating ice cream and experiencing the taste, or thinking about ice cream and its taste? If you answered eating ice cream, you are with the Eastern contemplatives on this issue. Seeing or experiencing reality in this context means that one has meditated on emptiness, impermanence, and no-self so much that they have become automated processes. One feels them as part of every sensation and thought that arises. The opposite of nirvana is samsara, which means the type of existence most of us have right now. The word itself means wandering, and samsara, just like nirvana, can be understood in many ways. The classic one is the never-ending cycle of death, life, and rebirth, filled with suffering and ignorance. But that is just one way. It is considered, at least in some branch of Buddhism, that all our afflictions come from the untrained mind. As such, samsara is born of it as well, fitting enough that the state is called wandering, as the untrained mind wanders much of the time, and this is considered inherently negative according to research. Let's take a deeper look into mind wandering, which, at least in some perspective, can be considered the root of samsara. Firstly, let's define mind wandering. Mind wandering is thinking about something other than what one is currently intending to think about, or thoughts without a clearly identified proximate intention which initiated the thoughts. Mind typically wanders into one's own private thoughts and feelings, often without any awareness that it has wandered. Mind wandering occupies up to a third to a half of the awake time in healthy adults. These thoughts can be benign, non-working thoughts, fanciful daydreaming, or damaging, catastrophizing exploration of what has transpired. Now let's discuss what causes mind wandering. According to research, our thoughts are of two types: focused and goal-directed, or indirected and spontaneous. The internally directed cognitions that typically process the past and the future are generally unfocused and random, sometimes labeled mind wandering. Mind wandering is ubiquitous. 96% of Americans report daydreaming each day. Given that nearly universal presence of mind wandering, the word rest has been labeled by a group of neuroscientists as random episodic silent thinking. It's a state of mind where our thoughts drift away from the task at hand and start to explore different ideas and scenarios that are not immediately relevant. It's like when you are reading a book and suddenly realize you've been thinking about what to cook for dinner for the last 5 minutes. Mind wandering is not just a random occurrence, it is linked to the specific brain networks. The default mode network, or DMN, a network of neurons in the brain associated with mind wandering, is often talked about in research. Abnormal activity in DMN may predispose to depression, anxiety, attention deficit, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The DMN is believed to host several operations such as constructing mental processes or adaptive simulations to guide future behavior, processing internal cognition to imagine alternative scenarios, self-referential processing, and imagining the future. However, the DMN also has a dark side to it, with its hosting of self-referential processing and constructing mental models to guide future behavior. Specific DMN activity can produce mind wandering. Inability to suppress DMN activity can lead to attentional lapses and impairs the task performance. Now the question arises, can we train ourselves to have a better control of the DMN? The answer is yes, and one of the ways to do this is through meditation. Meditation is a practice of the mind to cultivate focused and relaxed attention in a state of acceptance. Both practices of meditation, focused attention and open monitoring have a goal of taking the participants away from self-related preoccupations and mind-wandering. Meditation can improve attentional focus, increase cognitive flexibility, decrease emotional reactivity, enhance the efficiency of executive processing, improve conflict monitoring and reactive control, and facilitate rational decision-making. Meditation also influences the brain networks, particularly DMN activity. In conclusion, mind-wandering is a common phenomenon that is linked to specific brain networks, particularly the DMN. While it can lead to negative outcomes such as depression and anxiety, techniques such as meditation can help control mind-wandering and potentially reverse some of these negative effects. For those interested in the science behind this, I recommend reading the article on mind-wandering attention, brain networks and meditation by Amit Sood and David T. Jones. It provides a deep and insightful look into the neuroscience of mind-wandering and meditation. The article brings up meditation, which is one of the 8 points of the Eightfold Path Buddha presented to his followers as means to be liberated from suffering. Meditation is our primary tool in getting our mind under control, so it ceases to cause us suffering. We have discussed meditation in most episodes thus far, but there's no harm in repeating a good message. So let's look into a meta-analysis on meditation and mind wandering. We'll be discussing an insightful article titled The Impact of Mindfulness Meditation on the Wandering Mind, a systematic review by Susanna Ferruglio. Mind wandering is a double-edged sword. On the other hand, it's associated with creativity and problem solving, as it allows our minds to explore different ideas and scenarios. On the other hand, it can also lead to negative effects such as reduced productivity and focus, and it can even contribute to feelings of unhappiness. Now let's talk about mindfulness meditation. This is a practice where individuals focus their mind on the present moment, acknowledging and accepting their feelings, thoughts and bodily sensations. It's a way of bringing the wandering mind back to the present, to what is happening right now. The article discusses how mindfulness meditation can reduce mind wandering. It's not about completely eliminating it, but rather learning to manage it effectively. The practice of mindfulness meditation can help us become aware of when our mind starts to wander and gently guide it back to the present moment. In terms of the effects of mindfulness meditation on the brain, the article mentions that during periods of focused attention and attentional reorienting, elements of the executive network are strongly activated. This includes areas like the anterior medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, which are major hubs for information flow through the default mode network. These areas are particularly involved in self-referential processes, emotional and moral evaluations. The article also discusses how meditation leads to reduced default mode network activity beyond an active task. This suggests that meditation can help regulate the brain's default state, potentially making it easier to maintain focus and reduce mind wandering. In conclusion, the practice of mindfulness meditation can be a powerful tool in managing mind wandering. By training our minds to stay in the present moment, we can harness the benefits of mind wandering while mitigating its drawbacks. So, by engaging in a practice of meditation that trains us to be mindful of our thoughts and abide in the present moment, we can help our wandering mind and bring us at least one step closer to Nirvana. It has been my experience that when one attends to things mindfully, not judging them instantly and not reacting blindly, the experience turns quite blissful when stress diminishes. Furthermore, when the chatter of the mind quiets down, it is like one has spent their entire life in a noisy room and finally enjoys silence for the first time, which is also highly pleasant. These types of blissful experiences are surely not the ultimate state, the final attainment of nirvana, but they give one enough of a taste of things to come to keep going. And if you feel that you are quite happy with this level, there's nothing stopping you from staying there. After all, living with less stress and more ordered mind is a certain improvement, and going further requires practice one might not have the interest or time for. When we think about happiness, the neurotransmitter our mind turns to is dopamine, as it is associated with rewarding experiences and in the extreme cases leads to addiction. It is what gives us the pleasant feeling when we succeed, especially when we succeed over our expectations. Remember, suffering is part of samsara or wandering and is caused by craving, while nirvana is liberation from all suffering by stopping or extinguishing craving. So, as the neurotransmitter that causes craving and makes us search for something outside of ourselves instead of being happy with what we have, dopamine clearly has a lot to do with samsara and nirvana. And to understand the matter better, let's delve into the article titled Dopamine Reward Prediction Error Coding by Wolfram Schultz, published in Dialogues in Clinical Neuroscience in 2016. The article discusses the concept of reward prediction errors and how they are crucial for basic forms of learning about rewards. This concept is implemented in our neuronal hardware, particularly in dopamine neurons in the midbrain of humans, monkeys, and rodents. A reward prediction error is the difference between the reward we receive and the reward we predicted. This error is signaled by most dopamine neurons. They are activated by more reward than predicted. Positive prediction error remain at baseline activity for fully predicted rewards and show depressed activity with less than predicted reward, so-called negative prediction error. Let's take an example from the article to illustrate how reward prediction error works. Imagine standing in front of a drink dispensing machine that offers 6 different types of drinks. You press a button not knowing which drink it will dispense, and out comes your favorite blackcurrant juice. This pleasant surprise is what we call a positive reward prediction error. The error refers to the difference between the drink that came out and the low expectation of getting exactly that one. If you press the same button again and again and the same drink comes out, there is no prediction error, and thus you learn nothing more about these buttons. However, if a different, less preferred drink comes out, you experience a negative prediction error. The prediction errors help you learn where to find your preferred drink. The dopamine signal increases non-linearly with reward value and codes formal economic utility. This means that the dopamine response to rewards is not a simple linear function of the reward value. Instead, it increases at a decreasing rate as the reward value increases, reflecting the diminishing marginal utility of rewards. The article also discusses how dopamine reward prediction errors can influence our behavior. For instance, the dopamine prediction error response may underlie our drive for always wanting more reward. This mechanism would explain why we need ever higher rewards and are never satisfied with what we have. We want another car not only because the neighbors have one, but because we have become accustomed to our current one. Only a better, or at least a new, car would lead to a dopamine response, and that drives us to buy one. This drive for ever increasing rewards can lead to frustrations and inequalities that endanger individual well-being and the social fabric. In conclusion, the concept of reward prediction errors and the coding by dopamine neurons provides a fascinating insight into how our brains process rewards and how this can shape our behavior. What does science have to say about meditation and dopamine signaling? Let's take a peek. There's a growing body of research examining the effects of mindfulness and meditation on the brain, particularly on areas involved in reward processing and dopamine signaling. Neuroimaging studies have provided evidence that mindfulness impacts the function of various brain regions, including the medial cortex, insula, amygdala, lateral frontal regions, and basal ganglia. Structural imaging studies have indicated changes in the hippocampus as well. These regions are relevant for understanding neural processes associated with mindfulness and are known to play roles in various aspects of reward processing and goal-related activity. In terms of dopamine signaling, one study found that yoga nidra meditation, characterized by a decreased level of desire for activity, were associated with increased endogenous dopamine release in the ventral striatum. The study used 11C raclopride PET scans and found that during meditation, 11C raclopride binding in the ventral striatum decreased by 7.9%, corresponding to a 65% increase in endogenous dopamine release. This increase in dopamine release was associated with the experience of reduced readiness for action, suggesting that being in the conscious state of meditation may suppress corticostriatal glutamatergic transmission. As for reward prediction error, a study published in Scientific Reports found that short-term mindfulness practice can attenuate reward prediction error signals in the brain. Specifically, the study observed a decreased response to positive prediction errors in the putamen in a group undergoing mindfulness training compared to a control group. The researchers suggested that the increased attention to the present moment and its interoceptive features, a core component of mindfulness practice, may reduce predictability effects in reward processing without dampening the response to the actual delivery of the stimulus. I will just quote a few relevant passages from the discussion of this previous article called Short-Term Mindfulness Practice Attenuates Reward Prediction Error Signals in the Brain by Ulrich Kirk et al. Quote, "These results are consistent with the traditional view of mindfulness meditation as a cognitive process favoring attention to the present moment and not being caught in self-projection processes of mind wandering away from the here and now. This particular attentive stance is typically engaged through the continuous heeding of interoceptive and or proprioceptive signals like the sensations elicited by one's own breathing or by the active regulation of the sitting posture. The increased activation of the right posterior insula in response to juice consumption exhibited by the MT subjects compared to controls supports the notion of enhanced interoception following mindfulness training. It also aligns with recent formulations of reward prediction error hypothesis, where insula's activity codes for the sensory salience of a stimulus. It has been previously reported that mind wandering can distract away from reward anticipation, causing a reduced delay discounting, while meditative practice has been shown to decrease mind wandering with quantifiable cognitive effects. The apparent contradiction between these and the present findings were MT reduced the striatal response to prediction error mirrors similarly contrasting reports of a reduction in nociception by both distraction and mindfulness. This may be explained considering that mindfulness training entails refraining from interpretation and judgment to stick to the bare moment-by-moment changing of sensations. Indeed, mindfulness training may facilitate a reduction of those components of mind wandering related to the automatic activation and unfolding of the cue-triggered chain of predictive associations leading to the consummatory behavior. In fact, from a Bayesian perspective, mindfulness may foster an increased superposition of the probability densities associated with the different possible predictions, so that the usual winner-take-all mechanism is weakened and the state of the system shifts toward an equipotent poise where no specific hypothesis is favored for prediction and the ensuing prediction error is therefore overall attenuated. These findings provide a preliminary understanding of the potential mechanisms by which mindfulness and meditation practices might influence dopamine signaling and reward processing in the brain. However, more research is needed to fully elucidate these complex interactions and their implications for health and well-being. During my own contemplations, I have wondered how mindfulness practices would play along with dopamine system and reward prediction error, and it seems to be in accord with these theories postulated by real researchers. The way I figure dopamine signaling makes us crave for something that we don't have at the present moment and imagine how things would be better once we reach it. This creates displeasure with the present moment. Furthermore, once or if we attain that something, the pleasure we get is lessened, the more closely we need to anticipate that attainment. Also, when we get in contact with something unpleasant, dopamine makes us avoid it in the future. Now, let's think what would be the logical conclusion of mindfulness practices on dopamine-signaled reward prediction error. With mindfulness, we abide in the present moment with an unjudging attitude, with curiosity. This approach makes us find surprising, pleasant things all around us. With a mindfulness master like the past Thich Nhat Hanh, enjoying every breath, every step, every cloud and flower. Surprising rewards stimulate the dopamine system, and with mindfulness, one essentially finds surprising rewards at everything all the time, which, thinking logically, would cause the dopamine system to fire continuously. The dopamine system also, in a manner of speaking, evaluates our behavior to make its judgments on whether to make us strive for or avoid some behavior in the future. When it notes that we are having such a good time, logically it would signal us to keep doing what we are doing, so essentially continue being mindful. This should make one's existence very rewarding, and the aforementioned Thich Nhat Hanh often remarked how it is a wonder, a miracle to be alive, so it sounds like it worked exactly like this, at least for him. With this practice, one can very well attain a very blissful state, moving us closer to Nirvana, both in how we feel, but also as we have learned skills necessary to move forward in our path towards liberation. And like the aforementioned Yoga Nidra study seems to support, the amount of dopamine seems to increase, at least during that type of meditation, so it could hold true for other types, and eventually for a mindful state of mind outside of traditional meditation also. Next, let's discuss Nirvana in the sense of understanding emptiness and how it can impact our mental health and overall well-being. First, let's clear up what we mean by emptiness. In the Buddhist tradition, emptiness doesn't imply nothingness. Instead, it points to the idea that all phenomena including our thoughts and emotions, do not possess inherent independent existence. They are interdependent and constantly changing. So, how does this translate to our everyday life? Well, this understanding can help us realize that our thoughts and emotions aren't fixed or unchanging. They can be influenced and transformed. Just like we have discussed in previous episodes, one's emotions, for example, are influenced by everything from posture and expression to thoughts to the level of neurotransmitters in our brain and certain foods and nutrients and so on. It's a bit like looking at a cloud in the sky. It might look solid and permanent, but give it time and it will morph and change or even disappear entirely. This is where mental flexibility comes into play, which is the ability to adapt our thinking based on new information or changing circumstances. It's a bit like being a mental gymnast, able to flip and twist your thoughts to adapt to the situation at hand. A practical example of mental flexibility could be adjusting your work approach when given a new task or facing a setback. Instead of sticking to the same routine, you might brainstorm new strategies, ask for advice, or break the task down into smaller, manageable parts. Cognitive reappraisal is another tool in our mental toolkit that make use of the empty nature of everything. It's a strategy used in psychology that involves changing the way we think about a situation, event, or emotion to alter its emotional impact. Imagine you are feeling anxious about a public speaking engagement. Instead of dwelling on the fear of messing up, you could reappraise the situation as an exciting opportunity to share your knowledge and passion with others, or as a chance to work on your ability to tolerate public speaking, or even as a chance to shine in front of all others on a podium, and so on. The possibilities are endless, as everything is empty, meaning one can just fill it with whatever meaning they wish, while remembering that meaning is no more or less real and correct than any other view. Both of these tools, mental flexibility and cognitive reappraisal, can be honed and strengthened. Practices like mindfulness and meditation can help, but so can cognitive behavioral therapy and other forms of psychological training. So how does this all relate to nirvana or enlightenment? Well, by recognizing the emptiness of phenomena, we can reduce our attachment and aversions. These are two sources of suffering according to Buddhist philosophy. Understanding that our self-concepts aren't fixed can reduce attachment to a particular self-image and the aversion to anything that threatens that image. In practical terms, this might mean that instead of getting upset when someone criticizes us, we can see it as a chance for improvement. Instead of feeling crushed by a failure, we can view it as a stepping stone to success. This perspective can also foster compassion and patience. By understanding that people's actions aren't inherent traits but are influenced by numerous factors, we can find it easier to forgive and show empathy. When we recognize how mindless we are ourselves, we have been before learning about mindfulness, all the tools for emotional control and so on, it is easier to forgive others, empathize with them, and even feel pride on how far you have come. In summary, understanding emptiness, practicing cognitive reappraisal, and developing mental flexibility can be paths towards reducing suffering and increasing peace and satisfaction. But remember, it's a journey that requires ongoing practice, patience, and sometimes guidance. While some type of blissful state is usually what encourages one to seek self-improvement, when one realizes emptiness, one also comes to understand that bliss is also empty. This might sound like a real downer at first, but by not seeking bliss, one often manages to find it. as grasping for happiness is the sure source of dissatisfaction. The goal of Buddhist practice is not happiness per se, but liberation, and happiness is just a side product. Moving ever deeper in the path towards extinguishing all suffering and seeing reality as it is, the highest teachings of Buddhism tell us that Nirvana too is empty, as is samsara, and these two, which we have thus far discussed as opposites, are in fact exactly the same. It is only our mind and mental projections that make them look different. It is at this point, at the latest, that one comes to the understanding that one does not really have to move anywhere or wait for the future, but one can enter into nirvana, meaning a blissful, non-attached and disillusioned state right away. In practice, this usually does not happen, apart from the ones whose minds are for whatever reason perfectly suited for the teaching. As such, training, perseverance and self-improvement are usually required, which is why this podcast is aimed at people who are interested in so-called self-improvement. Perhaps by approaching the topic from this direction, I can inform people of the possibilities they can all realize, attaining the ultimate state, which is probably much more than they dared to dream, as the usual goals are something like I want to get in better shape or I want to be more productive. Nothing wrong with these goals, of course. I have had and still do such goals, but I believe the person who is willing to do the work or even enjoys the challenge of improving themselves would be interested in reaching for what is considered from many perspectives as the highest goal they could attain in this life. If even nirvana is just an illusion, meaning not what it seems at first glance, differentiated from normal life and existence just by our misconceptions, what is there to seek then? The traditions that move beyond nirvana, like branches of Tibetan Buddhism, instead seek to experience and abide in the true nature of mind, called by many names such as Buddha mind or Buddha nature, Rigpa non-dual awareness or clear light mind. This, like one research article puts it, involves insight into the nature of mind and reality characterized by experiential recognition or knowing and abiding in experiential ground from which self and reality are construed. This can be understood to essentially mean that one never leaves a meditative state, having practiced meditations of mindfulness and emptiness so much they become part of one's constant experience. The traditions move beyond mindfulness as well, as mindfulness is always mindfulness of something, so it has an object, but the state pursued here is more like alertness or awareness that is not directed at anything, maybe with the exception of the awareness itself. As we have discussed in a previous episode, meditation has been shown to change EEG readings, meaning something in our consciousness is changed. So even this kind of makeover of consciousness is not impossible. A research article called Defining Contemplative Science, the metacognitive self-regulatory capacity of the mind, context of meditation practice, and modes of existential awareness by Duchaya Dorji of Bangor University shows a progression of what the author has termed modes of existential awareness. The bottom stage is immersion in mental phenomena, which I understand to essentially mean mindlessness. Via practice, one gains the stage of decentering from mental phenomena, so non-attachment, like the distance created by mindfulness between self and one's emotions. This is followed by what are termed absorptions or jhanas, meaning experiences during meditation ranging from bliss to equanimity, even to rapture. This is followed by experiential emptiness of self and culminates in pristine awareness, and the one who has attained this can be truly called a Buddha, an awakened one. Next, we are going to delve into non-dual awareness, or NDA, which is the state of consciousness that truly sets one free, so practically the same as pristine awareness discussed before. And we'll also discuss minimal phenomenal experiences, or MPEs. We'll be discussing an article titled Neural Correlates of Non-Dual Awareness in Meditation by Zoran Josipovic. Firstly, let's define non-dual awareness, or NDA. NDA is a type of awareness, a basic non-conceptual, non-propositional awareness without subject-object dualistic structure. It's described in Indian and Tibetan non-dual traditions as the pure element of awareness in all knowing. It shines by its own light. It is self-luminous. Dualism in this context means dividing experience into competing opposites, like myself versus others, good versus bad, inside versus outside, and so on. The mind of a normal person, so most of us, is dualistic. In the awakened one who has attained non-dual awareness, these distinctions cease to exist, like a dream that is forgotten when we wake up in the morning. This non-dual awareness is thought to be in the background, in each of us, but goes unrecognized because it is covered by other thoughts and mental constructs that pull our attention to them. Now let's talk about the differences between NDA and other forms of meditation. NDA meditation is different from focused attention and open monitoring meditations. Focused attention and open monitoring meditations are content-driven and thought to involve networks for endogenous and exogenous attention and salience. In contrast, NDA meditation is not primarily oriented towards attending to specifics of one's experience, and it does not include the force of concentration required in objectless shamatha or concentration meditation. Meditations we are more familiar with, like mindfulness of breathing and emotions and open monitoring, are seen as stepping stones on the path towards realizing NDA. It is traditionally thought that ultimately NDA is not achieved by exertion, like heavy concentration, but instead by relaxing, so all mental constructs fall away and only non-dual awareness is left, like the sky becoming visible as clouds drift away, like the author of the article puts it. Effortlessness in NDA meditation is of a different kind from that of mastering a skill. Rather, it is akin to that of ceasing the effort of searching for one's keys upon finding them in one's pocket. NDA has always been a part of you, so one simply has to recognize and remember it. The article also discusses the neural correlates of NDA. The results of the study support the intuitive but speculative idea that typical anti-correlations between the intrinsic and extrinsic networks might reflect the duality of internal and external experiences. The study found that NDA meditation enables a state of mind in which extrinsic and intrinsic experiences are increasingly synergistic rather than competing. In a follow-up fMRI study, the author is currently conducting on NDA with minimized phenomenal content. The results indicate that anti-correlation between intrinsic and extrinsic networks can be influenced in profoundly different ways through meditation. In conclusion, NDA is a higher order awareness that appears to be inherently present as a potential in all of us. It enables a state of mind in which extrinsic and intrinsic experiences are increasingly synergistic rather than competing. This understanding of NDA and its neural correlates provides a fascinating insight into the neuroscience of meditation and consciousness. Now I understand that if you are hearing about this for the first time, this likely sounds very far-fetched and like I am trying to convert you to some weird cult. That's what I felt and thought the first time I learned of these subjects as well. I thought to myself that I'll just stick to meditation and mindfulness and other studied practices and leave this more religious sounding stuff like Buddha mind alone. But what happened instead was that as my practice deepened, I grew more interested in how far I can go following this path. And eventually my curiosity led me to studying these more secret practices as well. And what has me convinced is that no belief in anything supernatural is still not required, even when the teachings are quite unlike what I have heard ever before. By following the instructions, one can experience these things for oneself, and seeing is believing, as they say. So, if looking into something called non-dual awareness sounds like hogwash to you, that's okay. I would still encourage you to practice mindfulness, meditation, cognitive reappraisal, and so on, as they can benefit anyone who practices them. I must admit, I'm not quite sure the culmination of this practice is for me either, as the current Dalai Lama himself has stated that once this ultimate goal, pristine awareness or clear light mind, meaning a special state of consciousness, is attained, that, I quote, when that ultimate experience of clear light takes place, all the other types of consciousness, the coarse levels of mind, sensory faculties, sensory consciousnesses, and the coarse levels of mental consciousness are all dissolved and the breathing process ceases. But one question which is not settled or certain yet is whether or not a very subtle functioning of the brain might still be present in that state. This is something we still have to discover, and I have discussed it with a number of brain scientists. Given the premise of neuroscience that consciousness, awareness or psychological states are states of the brain, we have to find out whether or not at that point of clear light the brain still retains some function. End quote. I quite like breathing and my brain functioning, and it is left unclear whether these functions resume or if they just stop permanently, so I think I'll be content with my other meditations for now. I just find it interesting to know just what kind of unusual, almost superhuman things can be achieved when one sets their mind on self-improvement. What a journey we have been on together, good listeners. We have traversed the vistas of ancient wisdom, ventured into the realm of modern neuroscience, and found common ground where these two worlds meet. As I mentioned, the topic of this episode was quite ambitious, and I hope discussing the subjects mostly from the science point of view made it more approachable. I know it did for me, at least until these things can be experienced for oneself directly, at which point all, or at least most, disbelief ceases. We started with the concept of Nirvana, a state of liberation and freedom from suffering in Buddhist philosophy. It's a state often misunderstood, and as we discovered, it's not about some otherworldly realm, but about a profound shift in how we perceive and engage with the world around us. We then delved into the neuroscience of mindfulness and meditation, practices that have roots in Buddhism and other contemplative traditions. We discovered how these practices can influence the dopamine signaling in our brain, especially in the reward-related networks. Science shows that these practices can increase dopamine levels, leading to enhanced well-being and emotional resilience. We also explored the concept of emptiness or sunyata in Buddhism, not a nihilistic idea, but a deep understanding that things do not have inherent meaning and that we are the ones who attribute meaning to them. And this understanding can lead to a profound shift in our perspective, a form of cognitive reappraisal. Cognitive reappraisal, as we have learned, is a psychological tool that we can use to change our emotional responses to events by reinterpreting the meaning we give to them. This mental flexibility, supported by scientific studies, has been shown to enhance well-being and performance. We've also seen practical examples of how we can apply cognitive reappraisal in our lives. Remember, the next time you face a challenging situation, that you can choose to see it as an opportunity for growth instead of a threat. When confronted with a so-called enemy, instead of reacting with hostility, view them as a chance to cultivate compassion and patience. And finally, we touch upon a fascinating topic of going beyond even the concept of nirvana and engaging in practices that thoroughly change how we experience things, mostly for the better, but with the off chance of brain death, or at least that is how Dalai Lama makes it sound. This intersection of Buddhism and neuroscience underscores the universality of human experiences and the potential within all of us to cultivate a state of well-being, peace, and indeed nirvana, regardless of our religious or philosophical learnings. And thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey, and we hope that it offers you a new perspective on nirvana and how the wisdom of ancient traditions can enrich our understanding of our minds and our lives. Till our next journey together, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, the path to nirvana might be just a thought away. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Mindset Forge. I hope you found it informative and the lessons and practices spoken in it relevant to your situation. I also hope you found it as entertaining to listen as I found making it to be. If you found it beneficial, be sure to follow Mindset Forge on Spotify as well as on YouTube, where you can also give us a thumbs up. Also, make sure to check out our Discord server for further discussion, where you can contact me directly. Links in description and channel information. There you can also find the link to my book, which I have self-published on Amazon, called Death Tribe. If speculative dystopian near-future sci-fi sounds like a cup of tea, getting the book is a great way to support my work as an author. So have a nice day and memento cerebrum formare.